Hello everybody, welcome to the show. Today I'm going to be discussing a character that I'm really intrigued with, and I've been looking at his work for many of years, but I just don't know him as well as the lady we have with us today, Clare Mingins. We're going to be talking about Mesmer. And Claire's written a couple of books. Well, we've written quite a few books, but these are the two I've got, which is this is a translation, isn't it, of his work?
This is the first detailed biography of Mesmer by the poet-physician Justinus Kerner, translated into English by Anna Mary Howard Watts. So this is a 19th century translation of an late 19th century English translation, slightly abridged, of the German language biography by Justinus Kerner, written in 1856. But it's kind of been buried in, it's a piece within a larger book of Anna Mary Howard Watts, and no one sees it these days. So if you don't read German, particularly the old German, you're never going to read this wonderful biography of Mesmer. And the advantage of Kerner's biography is that he, although he didn't meet Mesmer himself, he met members of Mesmer's family and received many of Mesmer's possessions, his doctor's diploma, his glass harmonica, musical instrument, and other things. And he talked with people who knew him. So there's a lot of, he was much closer to the source than many later biographers. And, although you could say it's quite a romantic biography, he did at least try to, get to the source of things. And he also practiced something similar to Mesmer with the so-called animal magnetism, mesmerism.
Well, we're going to get into that kind of thing, aren't we? We're going to discuss, because also your other books, Gurdjieff and Mesmer, and the idea of reciprocal maintenance. For all those Gurdjieffians out there, you'll probably find this fantastic, and people that like Mesmer will as well. But maybe we could start with, who was Mesmer? Anton Mesmer, isn't it?
Yes, Franz Anton Mesmer. So he was born in Swabia, part of Germany, on the shores of Lake Constance or Bodensee, in a little village called Itznang. 1734 was his birth date, and he died in 1815. And he is famous, or to some people notorious, for inventing or discovering or rediscovering what he called animal magnetism, which is a bit difficult to pin down what he meant by it, but he received a lot of criticism for it, as well as a lot of admiration. And one interesting thing to me is his admirers through the ages, from his time onwards, may have caused him more harm than his detractors. But it's always, I suppose, it's this continued struggle between science on the one hand, in which Mesmer was very interested in and tried to align his techniques and theory according to the science of his day, and on the other hand, more occult or wacky theories. And to this day, these two streams, they seem to continually oppose each other, whereas it would seem more fruitful to, I'm on the one hand very much with a scientific background and like to approach things from kind of scientific method, observation, examination, with a critical, skeptical mind. Yet there's a danger that one can be closed, that if something doesn't fit in with one's scientific worldview, or it's immediately dismissed. Whereas if we can also keep an open mind to wacky theories, as well as everything else, that it seems the progress of science will be helped. So this is always very interesting to me, how these two seemingly opposing worlds can meet and help each other.
Because he was a doctor, wasn't he?
He was a doctor.
He discovered or rediscovered. I like to think he was rediscovering, because it's there, isn't it, in the universe? But we'll go on to explain what it is. But yeah, so could you just explain a bit about, he was a doctor, and then how did he discover this?
So yes, so Mesmer's life, it's a little bit shrouded in mystery before became famous. So we don't really know much about his childhood, except that he loved nature, loved to get out in nature. He went to university possibly about the age of 15. I think it was Ingolstadt to begin with, and then Tübingen. And he studied, or was meant to have studied, law and theology. He might have gained more than one doctorate in various fields. And eventually he studied medicine, graduating at the ripe old age of 32. But it's a little bit, there's not very much known about those early adult years or his childhood years. And of course, there are many rumors that go about as, what was he doing there at that point? Was he studying in some secret school? Where did he get his knowledge from? But we really don't know very much about that side of his early years. In 1932, his first publication was his doctor's diploma, which was on the influence of the planets. And although he didn't talk about animal magnetism, that was the term he used later, he spoke about animal gravitation. He was very much an admirer of Newton, but what he meant by animal gravitation was some force that he visualized or imagined was behind the properties of matter, including gravitation as in Newton's terms. So this force of animal magnetism, or living magnetism, you could translate it because he wrote it in Latin. Oh, sorry, animal gravity, gravitatis animalis. That this, he seemed to visualize this as a force between, it could be celestial bodies, the sun and the moon and planets, and the earth, and between human beings, between animals, plants. So influences between all sorts of bodies on different scales. So this is the kind of beginning of his ideas about it. Whether he'd had much, whether this was based merely on theory or on previous philosophies or discoveries, it's difficult to tell. But it was in, I think, 1779 that he wrote about how he initially tried using ordinary magnets to help his patients. And he was very struck by the success that he found, particularly with nervous diseases, so-called. And he got these, had these magnetic cures, seemingly. But he discovered that he actually didn't need these magnets, that his own body possessed something, so he thought, that could cure his patients. Now, of course, we could look a bit askance at his claims of cure and all the rest, but undoubtedly there is an influence between, so for example, you go to the doctor or a therapist or a healer, and there's that influence, and it's so dependent on the attention that the practitioner or the mesmerist or the doctor gives you, whether they're willing to listen, whether they have kind intentions, their state. This all really affects the therapeutic result as well as the encounter. So who knows what Mesmer was finding out, but this he kind of built his whole system on this recognition that he himself could affect the health and the cure of his patients. And he would say that those with nervous diseases could be affected directly by this force of animal magnetism, but any disease could also be affected, and it could be helped. So this is very interesting to me, because one of my contentions that I like to annoy various people with is that every illness is psychosomatic. And of course, with some people that doesn't go down too well, but I feel that even if you break your leg, it's not just a physical problem. And of course, the mind and the body are not two things, they're part of the same thing, but we often ignore that subtler part, which has such an effect on the rate of healing and our well-being. So there are many questions which are quite subtle, and it's so easy to dismiss things that just aren't in one's, pet way of viewing the world. So my call to myself, as well as, colleagues and friends, is to, I must try to not get set and fixed in my ideas so much that I can't accept new things which might, help this worldview enlarge and widen.
Too right. We don't want to be stuck in rigid boxes, do we, or rigid ways. We want to be able to see that things aren't quite always what they seem directly to the eyes. There's more
Indeed.
going on. Like when you were talking about this force that he was discussing, this gravitational animal gravity, it's not something we can see, is it? So that's why many people dismiss it or poo-poo it, because they want physical evidence rather than being a part of it, because it was an energy. It's an energy, isn't it? It's like a force, an energy that can be affected by other things, but he seemed able to tune into it. Would that be a good way of putting it?
Sorry, the cat says hello,
there,
by the way.
Yeah. Bit of animal magnetism there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so you might hear her purring before long.
That'd be great. She's enjoying it.
I think so. She's going to tangle herself up in the wires. I might just put her down. Come on. That's it. So, animal magnetism. So the people who, the scientists and members of the Royal Commission that investigated Mesmer in 1784, they were, concerned about Mesmer's claim that animal magnetism was a fluid, and through this fluid, the mesmerist, the magnetist, could influence people and cure their diseases. So they spent quite a few months investigating this, and it's amazing. The first kind of placebo-controlled trials, really very well described and organized. And of course, they didn't find any such fluid, and they, said quite justifiably that, the cures that were claimed could have been for all sorts of reasons, time, expectation, imagination. So this famous investigation of the Royal Commission, which was headed by Franklin, was, I think, a great disappointment for Mesmer, who found a lot of faults with it. But there's a perpetuation of this idea of animal magnetism claimed by Mesmer to be a fluid. There were many fluids hypothesized for all sorts of the sciences, the caloric fluid and others, but they just weren't keen on this idea of animal magnetism as a fluid.
Do you think he could see it as a fluid, though?
Well, this is the thing. He's kind of famous for this idea of animal magnetism being some kind of fluid. But if you examine his writings, it's not quite how he talks about it all the time. So now and sometimes he might talk about it as a fluid, but particularly in his later works, you see, he often refers to it as something that flows rather than a fluid. Sometimes he refers to it as his whole system as animal magnetism. So as if animal magnetism is the science of what he's developed. So he claimed to have discovered a new science, as it were. So his methods were bound to get up the noses of his fellow learned scientists of the day.
Because electricity flows.
Yeah,
and in a way,
yes,
it is
absolutely.
a kind of another type of electricity, this force or magnetism that he's using, I think. So maybe that's why he was describing it as a fluid. Yeah. I wonder if he would describe electricity today as a fluid, because it's flowing, even though it's not a fluid.
Yeah, so we don't describe electricity as a fluid, but it is pictured as flow of electrons.
And called a current, and currents known
indeed.
in rivers and streams and seas. Yeah. So
So Mesmer was very interested in the idea of currents as influences between bodies, between people.
And what was he at the time when he was doing all this? He didn't quite start a school, but it brought a lot of people in that wanted to continue his work, who believed in what he was doing. He had a lot of students, I suppose.
He did, yeah. Certainly, these so-called societies of harmony were set up in various cities in France and elsewhere, and possibly with rules a little bit similar to Freemasonry. Remember, Mesmer was a Freemason as well, so there were lots of kind of rules and regulations, and we do have some documents which tell us what happened there, but the real meaty matters, what did Mesmer and his colleagues actually do, the procedures. Mesmer was a bit secretive about this. I mean, people later on described their methods of mesmerizing or magnetizing, but we don't get very much from Mesmer at all.
Because he didn't call it mesmerism either, did he? That came later, naming it.
Well, he did actually.
He did.
One of his books has the title Mesmerismus. So I don't know if it's him who, we don't know if it's him who kind of gave his name to Mesmerismus, or whether someone suggested it to him. But yeah, so mesmerism obviously comes from Mesmer, and he probably invented that.
And what would you say? Do you think he studied all that there were people doing this before, or do you think he really did find something new or rediscover it?
Yeah. So it seems to me that through the ages, people have discovered and rediscovered some, if not a force, then something that can act through what we perceive or believe in, which how our mind can interpret something to affect our bodies. There could be an energy or a force, but I mean, from my point of view, I don't like to say I believe in this, because I try to be economical with belief. But certainly the effects, remarkable effects that can be seen in others and experienced for oneself, with the mesmeric techniques as well as hypnotism. One can't, a scientist can't ignore phenomena, and I think phenomena, whatever, whoever triggers it, even if it's these crazy mesmerists, they're there to be examined.
Because also you were saying about the relationship, and he must have realized that having a the relationship with his patients would make a difference. I do find that I criticize doctors today with their lack of, what's it, bedside manner, I think it's called. And he probably understood that kind of thing, because he, as you were saying, as a child he was into nature and animals, and that does kind of make you more aware of how to treat people and animals.
Yeah.
So that must have had quite an effect on people as well. Like if you're feeling relaxed with your doctor and think this doctor's going to cure you, that's going to contribute towards your getting better.
Without a doubt, yeah. And of course, this is related to placebo effect. Of course, it's not just one effect; it's a spectrum of effects. But to me, the placebo effect is the most powerful medicine we have, really, and it's all part of it is this interpersonal influence. And indeed, it's not just the doctor or therapist that influences the patient. It's two-way. You can't get away from that. It used to be kind of emphasized, the hypnotist or the doctor has the dominant role in his influencing, and the patient or client or receives. But it's certainly a two-way thing. And I think that the more the therapist or doctor goes into a consultation with that in mind, and ready to be open and to learn from the patient or the person or the client in front of them, I think the more benefit for both parties can be from the consultation.
So he must have learned how to, I don't want to say the word study, but I will study people, how they react, how they're acting to him, or, you know, perhaps see what's going on behind the eyes, kind of thing. He probably was able to read people.
I guess so, yeah. And of course, he did acquire this aura of, you know, this wonder worker, and so that expectation itself from people generates a kind of self-hypnosis that, you know, this man is going to cure me. So if he points his finger at a painful place on my arm, and I'm expecting that he's a miracle worker, then that's going to have an enormous effect on how, you know, the physiological processes purely from, you know, the engagement of my attention.
Because that's what he did use, wasn't it? His fingers, kind of like his fingers were his wands of power over people, wasn't that? You know, some people might call it laying on of hands now, but I think it was different to that because he was actually directing energy, wasn't he?
Well, there are a few different ways. As I said, Mesmer himself was a bit secretive in the procedures he engaged in. But so in the Franz Anton Mesmer book, there's really a remarkable section on when Mesmer is asked to go to the castle of this Baron, Baron Harecki von Horka, to cure him of a throat problem that, you know, all the other doctors could not cure. And, you know, they said in the terms of the day, it's psychological, it can't be cured. Have this tea made of 10 herbs, which we'll each prescribe one, but we don't think it'll work. Try Mesmer. And so Mesmer came, and people heard about him coming. And so many hundreds of people from all ranks also came to the castle. It was in Hungary that Mesmer came to cure the Baron. So he attracted many people. And so this account, which was published in one of the journals at the time and then taken by Kerner for his biography, describes many picturesque and dramatic cures and episodes and what Mesmer did. And you know, pointing the finger is one thing. And, you know, if someone points a finger at you, that's, you know, I mean, on the one hand, if it's in the wrong context, it could be very threatening, but it certainly engages the attention. One of my favorite hypnotists of today is Barry Thame. He has a marvelous YouTube video, quite short, where he just simply points a finger at someone's hand, I think, and they just slip into a hypnotic trance. But, you know, his concentration and the finger and, you know, the eye and the attention is focused on that finger, and, you know, what on earth is he doing? You're just taken off balance. So pointing is a very powerful way to grab and concentrate the attention, which is all about what hypnosis and also its cousin mesmerism is about. But
Also gone.
Sorry, but Mesmer also did laying on of hands, as it were, and these so-called passes, mesmeric passes or magnetic passes. And so that this could be the long passes, which would be going from the top of the head all the way down to the feet. And it could be touching, but it was thought by Mesmer and others that more powerful than touching was you know, a few inches away. And so moving the fingers down, I'll show it for myself, down from the head all the way down to the legs, together with a few other conventional ritualistic maneuvers that came to be. This use of the hand to guide the attention, so, you know, is a really powerful thing. And they imagined, you know, currents going down the body, and which were said to, you know, remove morbific influences or, you know, the evil influences of disease, and to help the, you know, the movement of this supposed animal magnetism or life force. I mean, it was developed in various ways over the generations, and the laying over of hands on the painful spot or the diseased part, or over the solar plexus, which was thought to be a very key area of the body to respond to this mesmerism.
But it's also, I think, a lot of New Age people, or not necessarily New Age, or healers today would say that he's undoing the blockages that we get in ourselves, that we create in ourselves through our everyday life.
Yeah,
So
Mesmer would think in those terms, yes. Yeah,
and when he's going down, he's putting perhaps in tune with your body's flow.
Yeah.
Back into flow.
Yeah, so these are very interesting and picturesque ideas. Of course, in science today and in Mesmer's time, you know, these things might be seen as a little wishy-washy. But in spite of that, you know, whatever we think, whether we do believe in them or we take them simply as foolishness, you know, they can be used. And this is something that Puiseux, who is one of Mesmer's key pupils, who fell out with him at some point, but he, early on in his career, you know, believed in this magnetic fluid, that there really was this magnetic fluid. But later on, which you can find in his essay on animal magnetism, which is a chapter in his larger book of animal magnetism, that this essay is in the form of question and answers from a pupil to the teacher. And one question is, you know, do you believe in that animal magnetism is a fluid? Something like that. I'm paraphrasing because I can't remember the words, but the answer was, it is of no, it's irrelevant whether I believe it or whether I don't. But if I visualize it, again, this isn't his words, but he gives this wonderful exercise of visualizing, you know, the fluid coming from the fingers and placing the hands in a certain way. And so, you know, we know in modern hypnotherapy of the power of creative visualization, and in other disciplines as well. I'm sure you're a very good visualizer, Debbie. So visualization is, you know, immensely powerful for engaging with, you know, different processes of the mind than, you know, the ordinary everyday mind. I mean, artists and musicians perhaps are more used to engaging this part of the mind. But visualizing, you know, a fluid, particularly downward flowing, and the hands, as it were, are kind of props, you could say, to guide the attention. But if you're good at visualizing, or if you practice it, because it's a skill that can be improved with practice, then you don't need anyone to lay on their hands. If you can simply, you know, what I like is the image of flowing water. So to visualize a stream flowing from the top of the head all the way down to the feet invokes, you know, what could be called the relaxation response, helps the exhalation phase of breathing. It, you know, really can help calm you and put you into a different state. You could call it a trance state. So I feel that with the magnetic passes that go down from the top of the head to the feet are also engaging that relaxation response. And also, now this is, I'm trying to develop some sort of rationale for what happens sometimes. And, you know, because there are remarkable experiences that can occur with these application of these magnetic passes and laying on or over of hands. And one of them, I feel, is this evocation of sensation. So if you engage attention in a kind of organic way, and it's helpful to have someone else to do this, but it can be done by oneself, like a self-magnetism. But if someone helps you to do it, it can be easier. That attention is engaged organically in the body, and for example, with the hands going down the body, the attention also goes down the body, and subtle sensations arise. And over a little time, minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, I mean, it's not just your eyes that follow the hands. You might even have your eyes closed, but you somehow become more sensitive, and you could even perceive the differences in temperature as, the hand of the mesmerist might go down like this, that, you might not usually perceive such subtle differences, but the warmth of the hand, little wafts of air. And then it is an experience often reported by clients, and I've certainly experienced it myself often, that a wave of sensation or heat can flow down the body. And this also, must affect, the circulation, the blood flow. It certainly helps relaxation. And relaxation is such a big part of our well-being, and how any disease, whether primarily physical or primarily psychological, is cured, healed, resolved, whatever word you want to use. So I find all this hugely amenable to examining from, a modern medical, psychological, physiological point of view. And I feel we shouldn't just dismiss it because it's not quite how we view things in science, let's say.
Yes, like they would say that maybe it's still a bit magical, but that's just because we don't understand, or like you say, have a rationale for it yet.
Yeah.
But Mesmer talks about mind over matter, doesn't he? Or is that his students that discuss that?
Yeah, so Mesmer we don't really have much record of him talking about the mind. He's very physics orientated. So it's matter and movement and bodies and currents and combinations of elementary particles of matter. And, he builds up from that ground. The few places where we hear of him talking about something connected with the mind, so for example, the imagination and the will, is in that story about his visit to the Baron. So that there is some mention of imagination there. And I think it's in his 1799 work on his memoir on his discoveries that he talks about will a little bit. But these are very rare places in his writings. It's usually much more on a physical level. But Puiseux, who I mentioned, really developed the, let's say, psychological side of things. And one of his mottos was, thought moves matter.
Can we discuss that a bit more? Thought moves matter. Is that just kind of like another way of saying mind over matter, or is it?
I think so.
Different?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because it is very important in our minds, aren't they? How they affect things. Sorry, carry on.
And we can simply see how, not only in illness and psychological distress, but day to day, how our attitude affects our well-being, and over time our well-being affects our health and the length of our life. So this thought moves matter. It seems really, really important. We're so prone to negative self-hypnosis, thinking of what other people are, trying to mind read other people, and imagine they're judging us, or feelings of vanity, and just being identified with this or that problem that we can so easily get down in a downward spiral. Whereas hypnosis is always a stick with two ends, this suggestibility that we have. So although perhaps those who are the best visualizers are also the best at going into hypnosis, and so the most prone, if they're not careful, to going into this negative self-hypnosis. Whereas there's also that opportunity for turning the current, as it were, into a positive self-suggestion in all sorts of ways, whether it's just feeling good, or performing well in university, or creative arts. What we suggest to ourselves is affects body and mind so much. It's yeah, I always have to remind myself of how powerful this is, because it's just incredible what a low state one can get oneself into through this very same means. If it's turned around, we can reach heights that can hardly be dreamed of.
Yes, and I think that's what many of these great people like Mesmer and that were doing, weren't they? They were working on themselves, and we do get affected by what we think people are thinking. We shouldn't even think about that kind of thing. It's difficult though, isn't it? Because we all want to think that we are doing the right thing and that we're getting on well with everybody and everybody likes us. But then that
Or at least
negative
those in our
thing
group.
gets in.
Yeah.
Yes, those in our group. Yeah.
Those who won't like us, doesn't matter if they don't like us.
No, we should just be able to. It's
Yeah,
difficult though. That's going back to the Gurdjieff work of working on yourself, isn't it? It's like it's hard. We're programmed to want to be liked and want to do the right thing and want everyone to think that we're, okay.
Yeah.
And then not to do that about other people, not judge other people, not be negative about other people in our minds.
Yeah. So this social aspect of hypnosis really affects us.
But hopefully it would make people who would work with this kind of thing would start changing their way of thinking. I think when you look at this kind of work.
Indeed. So I would say it's relatively easy to work little by little on changing one's thinking. It seems relatively amenable to do that, but when feeling comes in, that's the real challenge, because feelings are so powerful, so wonderful as well. But if a feeling takes us and we are just swept away by it, what chance do we have, unless we've somehow prepared ourselves, perhaps by working on the thinking side first, that we don't always allow ourselves to be absorbed by these automatic suggestions that we make to ourselves almost without noticing it. So this seems, again, part of this hypnosis as a stick with two ends. That it's part of our the terrible way in which we can be suggested to do or become things that in our right mind we would be repelled by, but which can drive us into these depths, and yet it can be such a force for good in therapeutically, and in the use of visualization to reach different states of mind and resourcefulness. Please excuse the dog sipping the water in the background.
Oh, bless him. My one's fast asleep just outside. I don't think we can hear him snoring.
Okay.
But one thing I did want to ask you about Mesmer, because I was reading your book and I've read a few things about Mesmer, but he uses the word irritability a lot. Have I said that right? Yeah, irritability. Can you explain what he means by that?
Yeah. So in the early 1800s, I believe, or maybe before, this concept of irritability together with sensitivity was kind of being examined. There were a few different ideas about it. I think Mesmer took it rather in his own way. So I'll just describe how I see Mesmer's using it. So he was very interested in muscles, muscle fiber, and the effect of so-called magnetism, or his magnetic treatments on the muscles, the state of the muscles, and irritability, which I feel you could also, from Mesmer's context, maybe it's better to call responsivity. So the ability of a muscle to respond. You could say that was irritability in Mesmer's terms. And it's quite different to irritation. So in irritation, the muscle would be in a state of tension. And if a muscle is at the extreme of tension, it can't respond anymore, because what a muscle does is contract, become tense. So to be maximally responsive that the muscle has to lengthen and relax. So it's a little bit counterintuitive, I would say, that this irritability, which Mesmer saw as so important to life even, was all part of his idea of what animal magnetism did and how it worked. So he would say that animal magnetism, or the magnetizing of a patient, would increase or restore the irritability. So to bring the muscles back to a state where they could respond, or because it's the muscles that make us do anything. We can't do anything without our muscles. And you could say there's an axiom. Some hypnotherapists use mind is muscle, because what you think or imagine or visualize, that the muscles respond. And an example of this is using a pendulum. I'm sure you've used pendulums for all sorts of reasons, but the simple thing that hypnotherapists often do to demonstrate this is to get someone to hold a pendulum over a drawn circle with a cross over it, and to imagine, not to do, but to imagine only when holding the pendulum that it's going to go anti-clockwise, say. And simply from imagining, something makes the hand move, but it's not one's ordinary, it's not the same as one's just intentionally moving it, but the sense of agency is changed. So it's as if it's not me that's doing it, but something else is doing it, but I'm imagining it, which is allowing it to be done. So this connection between visualization or imagination and the muscles, the movement of the muscles, is really key. And the other thing to demonstrate perhaps what Mesmer might have meant by this restoring of the irritability is I've noticed when, sometimes treat clients with mesmeric type hypnotherapy, that if someone is very anxious and tense, when they go into a more relaxed state with the mesmeric passes, there's often some twitching or shaking, sometimes quite marked twitching and shaking and spasms on the road to relaxation. So it's as if, the muscles, something is happening to the muscles that is allowing them to come to a more relaxed state, but it's as if, as if something is, some force is entering there. So it's not they can relax directly. It has to be through a kind of, these spasms or twitches. And more anxious people can sometimes have very marked responses to this. And this might be part of what Mesmer called crises, an idea that goes back to Hippocrates and used and abused by many alternative practitioners. But Mesmer would say that no disease can be cured without a crisis. And what he meant by that was that with the application of animal magnetism, you could imagine it's like if a stream is flowing and a boulder is blocking it, then to move that blockage of the boulder, the flow of the stream has to be strengthened, or there has to be more water. That's like the current of animal magnetism. But in increasing that, first of all, that water is going to get more turbulent and rough before the boulders move. But when it's moved out of the way, then it becomes smooth and flowing again. So in a crisis, sometimes symptoms could be seen to worsen. And again, this could be all down to psychological reasons. But I think because the muscles play such an important part in our physical health and illness, as well as psychological health and illness, that there seems to be something very special about this response of the muscles to intentional relaxation.
We both read Gurdjieff, don't we? So and that's how we met, was through the Gurdjieff work. And your book, well, Gurdjieff himself likes Mesmer and gives him the thumbs up. And your little book looks at both their, well, I was going to say systems then, for want of a better word. Perhaps you could discuss that a little bit.
Yeah, so I don't know how many of your viewers know of Gurdjieff. Just to perhaps to introduce Gurdjieff a little bit, he was born in what's Gyumri in present-day Armenia in 1866 or thereabouts. Died in 1949. He could be described in many ways as a spiritual teacher, psychologist, writer, teacher of dancing, musician, composer. But I suppose it's for his writings that he's most well known these days. His magnum opus, All and Everything, and he was trained as a physician and a priest, and as a physician he was also what a term he uses, a hypnotist physician. So he really studied hypnotism very, very deeply, and in his in the first series of All and Everything, he and the other series, he really puts hypnotism in a very detailed way, you know, how it works, and it's just I would say that Gurdjieff's understanding of hypnotism is second to none in the past. Well, certainly in the last century or two, that his understanding of hypnotism is, you know, if we can get to the gist of it, this is really what will teach us about hypnotism in both its good and its not so good aspects. The complication with Gurdjieff is that his writings are not simply to be taken literally. There's a lot of allegorical stuff in there, so you can't just take things at face value, although some things you can. But I'd say one of the basic ideas for Gurdjieff is that human beings are asleep, and it's not just an ordinary sleep, but it's a hypnotic sleep, and this is the cause of all our problems, this tendency to sleep, which is related to our tendency to suggestibility, and it's the cause of our wars and all our egoism, that we're not in a proper state of consciousness, we're not aware. And another key idea is that we are three-brained, and what he meant by that was that we have not only the brain in our head, but also a feeling brain and a moving instinctive brain, which he would place in the spinal cord. And again, he talks about this in amazingly detailed way, both on a quasi-physical level and, you know, on deeply on a psychological level. The third thing that's, I'd say, was really important to me about his teaching is that he would say to his followers, you must believe nothing I say, you must verify everything. So this need for a critical mind, this need not to swallow anything one is given whole, even what he gives is, you know, really appealing to someone who's kind of based in a scientific tradition and wishes to examine everything, question everything. So that's just a little introduction for people who don't know of Gurdjieff.
That was brilliant. I couldn't have said, but that's one of the best descriptions I've ever heard said. You know, nice, clear, concise. You did great.
Well, it's I mean, there's so much else about Gurdjieff, but these are the things that I suppose from the beginning have really struck and helped me about his work and attracted me to it. But the writing I've done on Gurdjieff and Mesmer, the full title of which is Gurdjieff and Mesmer, and the idea of reciprocal maintenance. Now, it was based on a paper for the All and Everything conference a couple of years ago. And initially I wanted to cover much more ground, because there are so many links between Gurdjieff and Mesmer, all sorts of ideas which Gurdjieff raises, which the practice and theory of Mesmer seem to shed light on. And I wanted to, to examine these and, share what I'd found both in the comparison of the books and in my own practice, both personal practice and, with patients or clients. But I discovered fairly soon, and I was helped to this discovery by people who criticized my proposal for this, that this was too much. Concentrate on one thing. So this one thing is the idea of reciprocal maintenance, which is a huge, huge overarching idea in Gurdjieff's writing, and which has, really, I've been really taken with it since the beginning of my reading of his works from a very young adult. This idea of reciprocal maintenance, that everything is dependent on everything else, but it's not just a kind of advanced ecology. There's a whole system behind it, and very, very interesting to go into, very complex and very all-encompassing. So this was one thing. Mesmer, he was always interested in reciprocal influence, and his last book, Mesmerism, written or published about a year before he died in 1814. Its subtitle is System of Reciprocal Influence, System of Reciprocal Influences. And this kind of similarity of, the drive of Mesmer with examining reciprocal influences and Gurdjieff in reciprocal maintenance, which seemed to be behind all of Gurdjieff's ideas and all of Mesmer's ideas, I thought would be really important to look closely at. And so I found it a very useful exercise for myself. In so doing, I discovered some very interesting things about attention and about about the all the little difficulties we get with interpersonal relationships. I step on your corn by accident, not intentionally. You step on mine, and these misunderstandings that develop in our interpersonal relationships. That there was something here which I could really use, and I made a rather balmy thought experiment that taking the idea of currents from Mesmer, he was very keen on this idea of incoming currents and outgoing currents as influences, and he did regard it in terms of some fine material being exchanged between bodies, or we could say energy in our day. But I thought, well, if I take this idea of currents and these two terms that are used in Gurdjieff's writings, and it may be taken literally in some of his contexts and may have other meanings in other contexts, egoism and altruism. And simply as a thought experiment, but one which I found personally very enlightening, was to look at egoism in terms of an incoming current, and altruism as an outgoing current, as influences between people. And it's perhaps not so easy to, explain the core of it in just talking with you at the present time, Debbie. But this was one thing that I think I really got people's backs up at the conference when I tried to present it. But it's put in a bit more detail in the book itself. So I would say, don't be put off by the craziness of this, the seeming craziness of this idea. It's simply a thought experiment in the use of attention. And attention is a big thing in Gurdjieff's teaching. I wasn't taking it in a very sophisticated way, but simply a kind of practical, psychological way, and also to examine how it can be used for healing. One's own one's own healing and for others. So there are some, what I found very interesting for me, kind of self-discoveries that came out of, comparing some ideas of Mesmer and Gurdjieff. But this is just scratching the surface of, the possibilities, I think, of this field of looking at Gurdjieff's teaching through the use of Mesmer's ideas, and I mean the practical use of them, because I think in practice, whether it's just using what I call self-magnetism, which is very powerful, or using it, in a therapeutic relationship, is very, very interesting. And I suppose it's one of my key aims or wishes to try to communicate, the possibilities for modern hypnotherapy that I feel have been lost with. I mean, hypnotherapy these days is very good to a certain extent. Particularly, the CBT orientated hypnotherapy is very scientific, very good, and the input of Milton Erickson, he kind of really revitalized hypnotherapy. But yet, since the person who can be called the father of modern hypnotherapy, which is James Braid in the 19th century, he was really against Mesmer, and he developed a very sensible and scientific way of looking at hypnotic phenomena, and which I find Braid very, very good. But I think from Braid onwards, something has been lost, which Mesmer knew about, and which, with a re-examination of Mesmer, could help us in both our therapeutic relationships with, I suppose, even friend to friend is a therapeutic relationship, because you're listening to each other. But from hypnotist or mesmerist to doctor and patient to carer, whatever, this thing that Mesmer really understood and knew about, this interpersonal influence. I think if we could examine this more, it would be a great enrichment of modern hypnotherapy and just everyday life, really, because we can't do without other people, even if we whether we get on with them or whether we don't. And I suppose this current pandemic situation has really helped us to recognize how much we really do depend on other people, and when we don't have real face-to-face contact, that there is really something missing. So maybe to re-examine Mesmer on this ground of influence, this I feel would be very, very important.
Well, I think your book is amazing, because it made me exactly what you was talking about. I know you were saying it was like an experiment, but for me, it did make me re-look at the egotism coming in, altruism going out. It made sense to me. I'm not very good at explaining myself but you explain yourself really well. But I do see that by reading your book, you'd go more in depth about it, and it brings it all together, where many people might want to poo-poo it, but if they actually pondered on it, they would see there is something in it and it needs to be looked at. So I highly recommend your book. And not just because you're my friend and we know each other. I really think you made sense of what Mesmer was doing and how it can link to what Gurdjieff was doing, and they do seem to overlap, and that they're both trying to teach us the same thing of how to work with ourselves to make a better life for ourselves and a better world for others.
Yeah.
And hopefully other people, people are sheep, as we know, we all copy each other, or we see someone and want to be the same as them. So if we can do that egoism in, altruism out, then maybe other people will start acting like that as well, if they start looking at how they're working with themselves. It's a big leap from what you were saying, but little steps.
Yeah, I mean, this is all an exploration, really, and of course we get things wrong all the time, but being open to new possibilities and really trying to understand things. This seems to be the, part of the essence of being human, that, this wish to understand and to do.
Oh, well, it was fantastic talking to you, Claire. This was a really brilliant, fantastic talk, and I do recommend
with you,
your
Debbie.
books to people. People do look them up. You can find them online, paperback and ebooks. And I don't have your other book, which I noticed today was out, the one on food and...
Oh yes, so that's called The Two Chief Motors of Our Existence, Food and Sex.
So that's out as well. So thank you very much, Claire. Is there anything you
Very
want
welcome,
to add
thank
to
you.
it?
No, that's great, thank you. Just to say that I very much continue working on projects to do with Mesmer and Gurdjieff, and always very interested in feedback, potential collaboration. Please get in touch if you're interested in this.
If they wanted to do that, because I don't think you have a website, do you? Would they?
Do
you want to put your email out?
There is an contact email in the books.
Right, so people go to
and if you don't want to buy the book, you can just look on the Amazon, look inside, and you'll see it there.
Wonderful. Well, I hope this brings you lots of collaborations, and all the best with the books.
Thank you very much, Debbie.
Claire Mingins.
Thank you.